Welcome back to the Remote Access Redefined podcast. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek, and this is the fourth episode in the podcast's second season. Now, over the course of the podcast's first season, we discussed the important aspects of OEM and SDK remote access integration. You can check it out, of course, in its entirety at realvnc.com/podcasts and on all major podcast platforms. Now, in this fourth episode of our second season, we're trying to answer a question that's essential to modern IT, and that's how do you secure remote access in a world of mixed operating systems and device diversity where security and accessibility are often, they're actually at odds. And so joining me to answer this question today are two speakers from RealVNC. Dom Parks, as always, lead developer for OEM at RealVNC. Dom, thanks once again for joining me.
Hi, Nick. Yeah, it's good to be here again.
Glad to have you. And we also have Chad Knott. Chad is a pre-sales and solutions engineer at RealVNC. Chad, thanks for joining us today.
Yep, happy to be here.
Glad you're both here. Before we get started, just so the audience, in case they haven't listened to any of the previous episodes, Dom, I'm going to kind of start with you. Could you maybe take 30 seconds and talk about your work as a lead developer for OEM at RealVNC?
Sure, yeah, it varies a lot, but the OEM team's kind of focused on products and solutions that integrate with customers' own products and solutions, devices, hardware in some way. So I might be talking a partner through like an architecture or options for a new product that we're building together, or I might be thinking about the roadmap for our own SDK, which is kind of a key component of these solutions usually, or planning some new work stream like that. But yeah, it's pretty varied.
Wonderful, deep knowledge and intrinsic into the application and the platform itself. So I'm glad to have you here because you're going to add a lot of value, I think, in today's discussion. Chad, kind of the same thing, but maybe a question I'll throw you as just a pre-sales engineer. What's your main focus when you're supporting IT teams around mixed OS environments?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, as the solutions engineer, kind of my role is to take complex requirements. So if a team has multiple tools and OSs to support, my job is to figure out a way where we can streamline that. A unified remote access platform, how we can kind of walk through how that eliminates security gaps, and just come up with a solution for the customer that meets their needs while reducing complexity in their environment.
Wonderful. I'm glad to have you both. I think we're both going to provide some interesting perspectives. Dom, I'm going to start our conversation today with you. RealVNC, of course, put out its Remote Access Trends Report for 2026. And in that report, it warned that organizations are using more than 3 remote access tools. And when they do so, they see more than, I wrote down some of my notes here, they see more than a 50% higher security incident rate when they have at least 3 or more tools. The question is, why is this tool sprawl so problematic with organizations when they're managing such diverse devices?
Yeah, I like the term tool sprawl. Yeah, I mean, it happens often, doesn't it, with sort of organic growth of systems, companies, whatever. You have problems that happen over time, and you pick a solution that works there and then for that particular problem, and that's fine. But for remote access in particular, every tool is a potential way into your network, a potential vulnerability. And each tool is going to have its own configurations, its own security models, potentially its own strengths and weakness, and its own vulnerabilities, potentially things that get reported as CVEs. So you need to be on top of all of that. And if any of those things are not accounted for, if there are any gaps in your understanding of what you've got out there, across whatever you're managing, or any gaps in just how you've configured things, how you're managing things, then any one of those tools could allow a way in. So it's the more you have, I guess, the more chances are that one of them is going to be a weak point, or it's going to present a weak point. I think that's pretty much it.
I assume the tool sprawl is a product of both the idea of there's a different part of the organization that suddenly needed to support a new type of device that hasn't been supported beforehand, or they just bought their own solution because they wanted to do their own work, their own remote access and so on. And it's not centralized. Yeah. And then, on top of that is just no one is centralized is kind of the theme there. No one is centrally managing all of that for the organization. That's probably part of it. And then at the same time, we as IT folks tend to run towards the technology and thinking about, oh, cool, that'll solve my problems because I need to do X, Y, and Z. And it'll solve it, as opposed to thinking it from a business standpoint, which is how to come up with one solution, better licensing and pricing, the same deployment of security policies across the board, providing the devices themselves support it, and so on and so forth. Chad, kind of along the same lines here, we have organizations that are trying to support remote access for Windows, Mac, Linux, mobile devices. What's the most common challenge around remote access that you find IT teams have when all those disparate devices have to be supported?
Yeah, and that is kind of a really common challenge. I kind of think of it as like policy drift. So you start out with really good, effective policies, and then you start adding different OSs that are managed differently. So, like for example, if you do Windows and you manage that through SCCM, you get Macs involved. You start using Jamf to manage these. You're using SSH keys for Linux. You're doing mobile through like an MDM platform. All of these different policies are different. They're different tools. And the challenge is making sure that you're aligned on all the tools, have the same requirements, have the same options. So you don't have policies that are like canceling this policy out because you applied a different policy for a different operating system. So you have kind of that policy mix there. And then the other piece is you have kind of the knowledge burden. So you have to have people that can support all of these different platforms. And again, the more platforms you have, the more tools you have, the bigger knowledge burden that is around documentation, misconfigurations. If something happens when you have all these different tools, it's like you're doing a jigsaw puzzle with like pieces from 10 different puzzles. You're trying to put them all together and make it work. So it is a big challenge, and there's a lot of opportunity there for vendors to consolidate and move to a single unified solution.
You actually had me at policy drift. I threw out tool sprawl. You threw out policy drift, and then you said knowledge burden. I'm like, it's like you heard it here first, folks. That's where we're coming with all these great terms on this podcast today. So we have 3 so far. We'll keep the count going. Maybe we'll see. But I love this. Dom, staying on the topic of, I'm going to use Chad's term, policy drift, if you will. Why are so many IT teams struggling to enforce consistent policies? We know part of that is maybe the limitation of a given device. A Raspberry Pi supports far less security policies than, let's say, Windows or Mac OS. So that's part of it. But why do they struggle to enforce consistent policies across the different operating systems? And then on top of that, I want to add in what kind of risks are you seeing that arise because of the inconsistency?
Yeah, I think Chad covered a lot of that with his answer to the previous question, but and it's similar to the issue with the tools, isn't it? So you've got multiple different tools; they've got their different interfaces and configurations, and then you add underneath that there's an operating system that has its own way of doing things, its own security posture, its own built-in things that you need to deal with, as well as just the tools that you're trying to use for remote access. So all those things have a knock-on effect on each other. So maybe something works well on Linux, like you've got a tool that's built for that platform that works well. It has syslog support. Maybe it has PAN authentication. It integrates really well with that whole ecosystem, but it just misses out some of that stuff on Windows and Mac OS, or vice versa. So you just kind of end up with this nice idea of a policy, and a bit like policy drift. It's implemented as a kind of patchwork of security configurations and tools as each OS forces things in different directions. That inconsistency just leads to more gaps in your defenses. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. It's just at a even more extreme level when you've got diverse OSs.
And then I'm also thinking about just the policies within the context of a remote access solution, and thinking about the idea of, I named 3 or more from the report earlier, having 3 or more tools in a single organization. And Chad, I'm gonna throw this at you. You've seen an organization with as many as how many solutions in use? Give me any number you can think of that is real.
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially have a different solution for every operating system.
What have you seen though with customers though? Like, how many have you seen? Like, how many? Oh my goodness, how many? What's the most you've seen?
I think the most is around 5 or 6. different solutions. And kind of like Dom said, it's not, nobody wakes up and says, hey, I'm going to create a nightmare for myself. At work, it just kind of happens, as stuff comes online.
That way.
It just kind of grows, right? So you just, as problems come up, as solutions come up, you get a solution specific to that environment. And then, next year you do the same thing. And before long, that's when you've got that kind of unmanageable collection.
I will add to our list of coined phrases. We will call it solution entropy.
There you go.
I'm making this up as I go along. It doesn't matter. So, Chad, we've got this environment now that we're sort of painting a picture of multiple solutions. Each solution has its own set of security policies that are, even if we put aside what an operating system can support, just even within the remote access solutions themselves, there are going to be policy differences, feature capability differences, that are going to create security risks that Dom talked about a little bit here. But when you're talking to customers, what are some of the other hidden costs, the hidden risks that you see organizations face? And I'm thinking about specifically when maybe they rely on like open source solutions, or I'll call them point solutions, meaning I have a solution just for one specific OS. So what are some of those hidden costs and risks that they don't even realize exist?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think the first area that you have to be aware of is like the integration tax. So it's going to cost you to connect all these systems to your SIEM tool, like your logging tool, your ticketing systems. So that's just kind of expected, right? So all these tools you have to know what they're doing. You have to know who's authorized to use them. So there's all the work around that. The second I've seen is with open source solutions in particular, a lot of times technically they're very sound, but it's the business operations piece that people can get tripped up on, right? So if you don't have a support number, if you have an outage or a kind of a Sev1 issue, there's nobody to call. You don't want to give your CIO an update that says, yeah, I posted this question on the forum and I'm just waiting for an answer when systems are down and you're losing money. I mean, it's just, it's a tough situation, And then I think the biggest risk people don't appreciate is the compliance risk. So if you're using an open source solution that doesn't have, auditing capability, or we don't have centralized policy enforcement, vendor attestation, stuff like that, you're just introducing the potential of chaos down the road if you get audited and all of a sudden you're facing penalties for not complying with required terms that you might be missing or not thought through as part of that open source point solution.
Yeah, I also think maybe like licensing could come into play with point solutions. Obviously, not so much with I'm going blank here. Open source solutions. Sorry. That can come into play as well. You're not getting a discount on, for the large number of licenses using a centralized solution. So that could kind of come into play as another cost, not necessarily a risk, but a cost as well that certainly CFOs would care about. Maybe IT folks that are listening to this or watching this wouldn't care as much, but the organization would. Dom, diving back into thinking about security a little bit, we heard Chad talk about like taking logging from a remote access solution, putting into like a SIM solution. So you've got centralized auditing of some kind, that sort of thing. How do you see with customers that maybe a lack of centralized auditing, both, I wrote down here, complicates compliance and overall security, because it does both. If you can't demonstrate that you're compliant because you don't have auditing to show that only the right people had access to the right systems and did utilize the access and so on. And then of course, security as well. I don't know what anyone's doing. No visibility, lack of visibility means you're going to have a far more insecure environment. So how does it complicate both if you don't have auditing?
Yeah, I think most, as Chad said, you're probably going to end up having to do something to bring logs from whatever tools you've chosen into some, hopefully you're doing something to bring that into some central location. But, and yeah, there's a spectrum of scenarios, but the worst case scenario is you've got this kind of theoretical range of tools of open source, maybe built in, maybe unintentional remote access solutions that you're not even aware of. with logs in various locations and various formats and various time formats and all these sorts of things. So any centralization of that is kind of after the fact, and it's just gathering them together periodically, maybe at best, and hoping that you can spot an issue and work through, or you can spot why an issue happened, I should say, or when it happened. That's going to be a really, really complicated process, and it's going to be mainly only possible after the fact. Whereas if you've got centralized audit, you've got one kind of integrated tool. You'll have all the key bits of info in one format, in one timeline, hopefully in a timely manner as well. So you might be able to do things like raise alerts as things happen. You might be able to respond quickly, and you can definitely, in terms of, I think you mentioned compliance, so you can definitely provide a simple one source of evidence to a compliance team, say, and they're going to be a lot happier with that than all these different bits of ad hoc data that you're trying to gather together and munge into one report.
Yeah, let's maybe shift gears here for a second and think about the management of remote access solutions as a very simple means of trying to, and by management I mean managing both the solution as well as policies around security, configurations, integrations with identity providers. I mean, any of that kind of stuff. Just better management would create less risk. And maybe we talk about that a little bit. And Chad, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
And maybe look for what are some of the practical steps that you've either seen customers take or that you've recommended to customers where the IT teams can do something right now to kind of simplify management across device types and hopefully improve security.
Yeah, it's kind of a great question, right? You don't want to try to do everything all at once. Usually, what I recommend is start with visibility. Before you do anything, you need to know what you have. Usually, some kind of audit, right? So take a couple weeks, identify the tools that are out there in production. Usually you're going to find some form of shadow IT. So somebody just has done like a individual like TeamViewer license or an individual AnyDesk license, support staff that are using different tools, right? So you need to kind of understand what is out there first. And then second, probably, identify your requirements. So, do you have regulations? Are you under PCI DSS type restrictions? What does your cyber insurance require? Once you figure that out and once you have that information, you can kind of figure out what the floor is. And then is your current tool set meeting that? Is there any gaps there that need to be addressed? And third, I would say, again, don't try to do everything all at once, but identify like a single use case. So for example, like support desk remote control or help desk remote control. That's an easy win. That's a single thing that you can focus on, and just start there. So audit, figure out what your requirements are, and then figure out a use case that you can solve right away without having to complicate it with other things. I think it's probably the best advice I can give just off the top of my head.
No, that's actually really good. You've covered quite a couple of different aspects of it. Thinking about the idea of, obviously, I think everyone who's listening or watching gets the idea of if you have multiple tools, it's more difficult to manage, it's more difficult to secure, it's certainly difficult to unify and make it all the same across the board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You mentioned visibility being important. As organizations try to move towards unifying their remote access solutions down to maybe even one platform or less than, you said 5, I think, less than 5, down to 3, down to 2, down to 1. What's a common mistake you see the companies making when they're trying to do that?
I think the biggest thing is assuming that like rip and replace is the only way to do it. If you go into it with the idea that we're going to flip a switch over the weekend and Friday we're using one thing and then Monday we're using the brand new tool across the board, I think that sets you up to experience frustration. I think the better way to do it is to kind of have like a strategic overlay where you deploy your unified platform alongside of your current solution. You can route new use cases through it. You can kind of have both run in at the same time, and gradually migrate users as they see the benefits, as mandates come down. You want to make sure you have executive support and buy-in. That kind of leadership has to come from the top. So your CIO, CEO, CISO, those leaders have to kind of drive implementation and drive adoption, and I think drive the explanation of why we're doing this. Not my boss wants me to use a tool that doesn't work for my particular special thing. It's, as a company, we're migrating and moving towards a unified application so that we don't get sued, or we don't have this risk that could, put us in the news, for example. I think that's the number. You just want to not try to do everything at once, have a way to migrate, and then have the value and make sure that's communicated out and understood by the people that are using the tools. I think it's a good way to do it.
That's an interesting aspect you kind of touched on. You talk about being in the news, and I don't know that we actually even have. I'm scrolling through the questions I've written here, and I don't know that I've talked about this in here, but the idea of, obviously, if you have remote access solutions that are third party, certainly if you have ones that are going to be open source in place, those are supply chains. Those are opening up an opportunity for organizations to to be insecure if the solution they're using isn't secure.
Correct.
Dom, I'm going to throw this to you. Just a question around, would you walk through, even though we're trying to keep this all pretty vendor neutral, I want you to talk a little bit about the steps RealVNC took to make sure that the solution was secure. But maybe put it in the framing of, not look how amazing we are, because I don't think anyone wants to necessarily listen to that podcast, but at least talk about it from a standpoint of why it was important for RealVNC to take those steps to ensure that they were secure, so people can kind of get a sense of, maybe all of my solutions need to be doing something like this, and I should double check that they are. Can you just talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I can try to. I did think that the entire podcast series was about how amazing RealVNC was, though. So sorry, it hasn't been that.
No. It's awesome. How awesome? Really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think RealVNC was kind of created as a business because the open source VNC, which the original founders of RealVNC built back in the 90s at AT&T Labs and Olivetti Research Labs, they realized that there was a gap there. The big customers of that, who were using it as an open source project, realized that there was a gap there. So the first thing and the kind of foundational reason for the company is security. It's enterprise grade security and enterprise grade features, management, and all those things have come later. But the primary thing was, how do we make this safe for people to use across LAN, across networks? So that's been the guiding principle, I think. And organically over time, the feature set and the complexity of that requirement has grown. But we've always been about security first in the software development lifecycle. We want to make sure that people don't have to trust us to use our tools. We don't have any access to the data that's being transferred via the screen sharing tools, so that those tools are built to work in a hostile environment. We've always, over the time of updating the protocol, we've kind of moved from the open source to secure to even more secure with RFB5, and RFB6 is focused on streaming, but the ability of RFB5 to have plug-in ciphers and algorithms as situations change over time, I think speaks to that as well. And then, not on the sort of line of not trusting us, we've invited open audits of our software, penetration testing annually, and I think those sorts of things have been key and vital in just differentiating RealVNC as a solution here.
And then there was a certification as well that RealVNC went and got, or an analysis done, correct, by an external group.
Yeah, so we have certification like ISO 27001, which is fairly standard, but we did get a group to come in and audit the whole code base, the whole solution, make recommendations, and kind of provide an overall level of their happiness with our security practice and our code base. That was a QF53 audit, I think it was. So yeah, that's something you can view online.
Yeah, I find that to be kind of important. It's interesting. You mentioned you starting with thinking about security from the beginning, because with remote access, of course, the primary user concern, and user being whether it's the IT person listening today who's putting it together, or we're talking about the end user, it's the productivity. It's the make it work for me. I want to be able to connect really fast and have great performance and feel like I'm there, and that tends to be what I would think with any kind of solution like this. What you'd be thinking about first is how do we make it remote access really awesome? And then on top of that, we need to make it secure. And so that brings me to a question of what do you think is required in terms of balancing security controls with the need for this great user-friendly access for IT teams? Where should they find the balance? Is it they should be looking for both equally? Should they be thinking about, you mentioned security first, from a development standpoint, should they be thinking security first and then look at sort of remote access usability second? What's your thought?
Yeah, so I suppose if you really completely focus on security, you're going to just ignore convenience and all those sorts of things, which then make it a useless tool, or could make something a useless tool. But I think so. IT teams have all got their own policies and requirements and existing systems. So to a certain extent, the right tool is one that offers enough range of security options in particular. So if you want it to be secure, it needs the right range to fit in with your use case. And then from that point, you can make it convenient for your users, hopefully, because, if you've got something like MFA, maybe it's an MFA that integrates with something that everybody already has, like a phone type MFA or a security card MFA. It's making it simple. And federation of authentication. So everyone's using the same credentials with it. So that's probably going to be vital in a lot of cases for keeping that convenience level there and the feature level there. But yeah, I think you need to have options for security that are sort of streamlined, already built into the day-to-day of your, and you're as an IT team, hopefully you're going to know what's right for your users. But something that's already built into the day-to-day, like biometrics and stuff like that, and not picking solutions that have like bolted on or poorly integrated security features on the top of something that's really nice. It works really well, but maybe it's fit for a particular purpose, but the security has been an afterthought, and it's clunky or something like that. Because as soon as you start to compromise on the convenience, or you try and get people to do things that are not part of their day-to-day, then they're going to try and avoid doing that, and then you're going to open up risks. So yeah, I think there's a balance, and if you go too far either way, you're gonna get into trouble. So I think it's about picking tools with a wide range of options on both sides.
I love that, Chad. I want to get your perspective on it. It's almost the same kind of question. I'm thinking about organizations that you've helped where they're obviously trying to maintain high levels of security, but high levels of accessibility and be able to have that remote access they need. What are some of the strategies you've seen work with customers?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like Dom said, you have to balance, usability with control. If you go too far on usability, it's super easy, but you don't have those, security controls in place that kind of keep bad things from happening. If you go too far the other way, users try to, if it takes 10 MFA prompts and 3 text challenges just to get signed in, there's friction, right? The more friction you put in, the harder it is to use the tool. I think probably the best solution is to kind of make sure, if you can, tier access, right? So low risk actions, they get streamlined access. Higher risk operations get more, a little more friction, right? So you don't want to, like I said, you have to balance it. I think if you make the secure path the easy path, that's when you get the wins, right? So if it's easy to be secure, which RealVNC does a really good job of, just a quick plug, That the secure path and the easy path, if they're aligned, then you're going to have a tool that gets good adoption, that protects your organization.
I think that the tiered access is a great answer because it makes a lot of sense. And it should be that way. If you have relatively benign needs in relation to data security, data privacy, access to sensitive information, blah, 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 all of that, we don't need to put 7 guard gates in your way. You just need ID and password and maybe MFA or something, and you're in. Versus if you need something that's a higher level of access, it's a privileged access, and or you're going to access something that is a system or a data set that is sensitive in nature. Putting more controls in place makes a lot of sense. So that's a great one right there. I think most people think that way anyway. So you're right in line here. Dom, from a feature standpoint, digging into your intimate knowledge of the platform here, what features would you consider to be, I'll call them non-negotiable in terms of what should be in an enterprise grade remote access solution for the mixed environments?
Yeah. So I mean, Nick, if we carry on from what you were just saying, that ability to segment the use cases, so devices categorized by the teams that are allowed to access them, and maybe even the level of risk that each device might present to someone accessing it or to the business. So that kind of segmentation, that's going to be vital. I think the baseline, which we've covered kind of in previous episodes, is just the strong encryption, the perfect forward secrecy, integration with federation, multi-factor authentication, token-based single sign-on, that sort of stuff. And conditional access is going to be vital, and permissions for features maybe as well. And all of those things, and the key thing in this topic is all of those things need to work in a consistent and reliable way across all platforms. So you're not hiding or papering over some sort of platform-based difference there. They need to work in the right way. But I think that's the non-negotiable stuff.
Wonderful. And Chad, any features you'd add to that list out of curiosity, or did Dom get them all first time around?
Dom's great. No, I would say like again, the encryption is a non-negotiable. The ability to control who's able to do what, so it's not just a free for all in the tool. You want to be able to provide tiered levels of access based on some sort of identifiable way, like Active Directory groups or something like that, where you can assign roles and rights based on function and job role. So that it's not just an on-off switch. You can kind of provide a tiered level of access inside the tool. I think is probably another really important feature to have.
Excellent. As part of this idea of trying to implement secure features, these non-negotiables across the enterprise, I think it's important that we talk about something that I touched on earlier, this idea of consolidating solutions. I'm going to stick with Chad's example of 5 solutions in an enterprise, and the people that are listening and or watching may not have 5. They may have 2. They may have 3. They might have 11. I mean, it just depends on what the scenario is, how big the organization is, and so on. There may be multiple instances even of the same tool that are just separately installed and therefore kind of considered a separate solution. And so thinking about this idea of consolidating here, and I'm going to give you both sort of poetic license that you can be thinking about consolidation down to one solution, even if in your head that's RealVNC, or if you're just consolidating solutions down to a smaller number. Either or is fine, but because the process is still the same, there's this need to obviously look at the business needs for what has to be able to be accomplished, like the practical productivity needs that I have to access these different types of solutions, the different types of platforms, and devices. But then there's also the business needs around security, which kind of then translates into the controls we've talked about needing to be used, and or policies that none of us are defining here on the podcast today, but they are policies around security, around who should access what, should privileged access be given by default, does it have to be requested, whatever the case is. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done in consolidating. It's not just let's get more licenses of solution A and push it out everywhere. There's a lot more that has to be done. So Chad, I'm going to kind of go back to you when you're helping customers consolidate. Because I know RealVNC does cover a wide range of devices. In some cases, more than, let's say, another two solutions together. You actually have more covered there. What are I'm going to call it like the benefits and the challenges that organizations experience as they consolidate remote access, and just beyond, like we've talked about policies a lot. So let's assume you get better policy enforcement. Okay, we know that because with a single solution, you'd have the ability to enforce to make sure everyone's remote access goes under these certain policies. We got that. So what are the other benefits and challenges? So, positive and negative, if you will, that organizations have experienced as they've consolidated remote access solutions.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest benefit is just like your operational velocity. If your support team can handle, Windows, Mac, and Linux from the single console, so it's the same UI, it's the same look and feel. Ideally, you would see your resolution times drops because you're not having to change tools, you're not having to switch things around. You'd want to see like your knowledge sharing improve, so you can have more mentoring. If everybody's working from the same tool, everybody's going to get better at that tool, right? Rather than having kind of knowledge silos. I think on the challenges side, the transition period's hard. You're kind of running two systems side by side. There's always the malcontents, the vocal minority that likes things how they were, and is happy to point out all the shortcomings of your new tool. I think managing those expectations and, sometimes one tool may have certain niche operations that the other tool doesn't. Just, being upfront about that, managing those expectations, kind of, again, having that executive level buy-in is really important to overcome some of those, hiccups as you're moving to a new tool. So there's definite benefits. If you go into it with rose-colored glasses and thinking everything's going to be awesome, you might be disappointed. So it's good to go in with kind of a realistic view of some of the challenges, but definite opportunities, definite things to be aware of as you implement this. So yeah, I think that's probably what I would say to people.
Solid answer. I just like that you said operational velocity. You've added another term that we're coining phrases today.
We're going to start
we should have like a game that people have to do. They listen to the podcast and we use these phrases. They go, oh, that's one of them, operational velocity. And they submit them somewhere and win a free t-shirt because they listen to the whole podcast. But unfortunately that doesn't exist. But continuing on, Chad, just thinking about the practical application of the things you've talked about here. Can you share maybe an example where consolidating remote access, like a customer example where they consolidated remote access into our RealVNC Connect and it made a measurable difference for that organization?
Yeah. So for example, one of the customers I worked with was a school district. They had a pretty decent size. I think they had around 20,000 endpoints. They had several tools. So they had tools for their Linux boxes, different like a Jamf for their Macs, just kind of a range of tools. And it is with a small IT team, it's hard to stay on top of that stuff. Consolidating to a single tool, you're going to get technicians using the same tool. You would hope to see your incident time go down. You're also going to gain benefits. This customer gained a benefit while they had a ransomware event. They could use the auditing capabilities to identify exactly what happened. It kind of helped them to kind of root cause the issue rather than having to piece together logs from 5 different tools. You can look at logs from one and get a better idea of what happened that caused the incident. So like I said, it's not perfect, but with that consolidation, there are real benefits. This customer in particular found that having fewer tools meant, again, better operational velocity, easier support, faster resolution times. That was kind of their experience moving from 5 tools down to 1.
And for organizations like that, or even if they only have two solutions, it doesn't matter. But for
Mhm.
organizations that are wanting to consolidate here, is there a certain is there something they should prioritize on so that they get a smooth transition from the many to the one or the many to fewer solutions?
Yeah, typically what happens first is you want to make sure your entity identity integration is set up. So if you're using SSO, get that set up first so that you can build off of that. If your authentication doesn't work, you're kind of dead in the water. So that's one thing that we recommend. The other thing is establish what your policies are going to be before you turn off the old tools. You don't want to lock yourself out of your own house. Third, then you can identify which devices you're going to migrate first by risk. So maybe you have, typically with other organizations I've worked with, like when you're rolling out patching, for example, you test with the IT team first. If nothing catches on fire, you can go to maybe the IT team plus the help desk team, and then expand from there. So you have kind of concentric circles that you start with. So small group, a little bit bigger group, a little bit bigger group, and eventually you touch everybody. Document everything, and it's good to keep track of progress. Have kind of weekly sync meetings where you can identify, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, here's the progress we've made, and then more importantly, here's the lessons learned. So you have a rolling log of, here's what went well, here's what didn't go well, and then we can carry those lessons into the next group of devices that we're gonna roll out.
Solid response there. I do appreciate that. That's some good fodder there for people to be thinking about prioritization when they're trying to roll this out and get things consolidated here. I've got one final question. It's kind of to both of you. It's just sort of as we wrap up here. And it's simply, what advice would you give to companies that are trying to use basically multiple remote access solutions for multiple operating systems and multiple devices? So one piece of advice, Dom, can I start with you?
Yeah, it's kind of like a summary of what we've been saying, but look at your use cases, look at your OSs and your what your users are doing with those OSs, and see if there are ways that you can consolidate your tool use on those, and find something that is consistent, some tool like RealVNC that's consistent across your main use cases. Try and consolidate it, and probably do what Chad suggests in small steps, in not as a big bang project. Because these kind of organically grown mixed environments are everywhere, and they're not going away, and your security will be compromised by patchwork solutions. So you need to choose a tool that works well regardless of where it's running and what your use case is. It needs to fit that.
Great. And Chad, what piece of advice would you give?
Yeah, I would say that a couple things of advice. The first one is to understand that fragmentation is not inevitable. It may seem like it, but it's not. You don't have to have the same tools, or you don't have to have different tools for different environments. That may have used to be the case. Now there are solutions that do have that same interface, that same look and feel across whatever OS you throw at them, like RealVNC, for example. And then start approaching this rather than like as a strategic imperative, not just like an IT efficiency project. Once you start approaching it from a strategy and a business survival, this is critical to our business and going forward, it just turns into a different conversation. Instead of tool management, it's strategic, it's long-term. You just get a lot more buy-in and understanding of why we're doing this. So that's probably my recommendations for people that are thinking about consolidating or starting that project, to think about why we need to consolidate.
Yeah, great insights today from both of you. Chad, appreciate you joining us today. Dom, as always, enjoy our conversations here. For those of you listening, that is all the time we do have for today. If you'd like to get more information about RealVNC Connect, you can, of course, visit realvnc.com. Remember, this is only the 4th episode in season 2 of RealVNC's podcast series, so be on the lookout for future episodes on your choice of podcast platform. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.